violations being discarded?
A lot of our smaller privileges, petty things, little infringements on just common work practices, coffee on the workroom floor, telephone calls, things like that have been taken away without regard or recourse. It's just lent to a bad atmosphere or a bad attitude coming from the workforce. Has maintained its high standards, we feel, and they're not allowing for some employees that aren't able to overcome it quite as quickly as the others. Their feelings have been discarded somewhat.
Yeah. Other problems have been transfers, casual employees not being made full-time, just things like that you would think would have happened?
Overall, our grievance rate is up, our discipline is up. It hasn't been a smooth transition. We have lost some vital employee input programs, and the other issues that you mentioned have been skirted or dropped or postponed. I think there's a general feeling that they don't know exactly how to approach it, and they need to justify some monetary problems that they've had. I don't know if it's directly related, but we're all under a budget crisis, and we're feeling the pinch too.
It hasn't been quite 6 months since the worst killing spree in Oklahoma history. On an early August morning last year, Patrick Sherrill walked into the Edmond post office and gunned down 14 co-workers and wounded another 6 before taking his own life. Today, there's new information out about Sherrill, some facts shocking, others not so shocking. First, news from a 5,000-page report by the Postal Service. Postal Inspector D.C. Swindle from Fort Worth, Texas, said today considerable evidence of premeditation on the part of Sherrill has turned up. Swindle says Sherrill did not leave a suicide note. He didn't tell anybody he was going to do this. We can only speculate, he says. There is considerable evidence of premeditation. Also from that report, information of something Sherrill is reported to have said to another man after being disciplined. One of these days, I'm just going to kill them all. That report has been sent to the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Oklahoma City.
5 Alive News has obtained copies of the disciplinary letters placed in Pat Sherrill's personnel file, indicating he had numerous work problems in the year and a half he worked for the Edmond Post Office. In March of 1986, Sherrill was suspended for maliciously spraying a fenced dog on his route with dog spray. The original suspension was for 2 weeks. In May, he was issued a letter of warning for violating overtime rules. And 2 months before the shooting, he was issued another letter of warning for failure to report to duty. In October of 1985, Sherrill was also suspended for leaving 2 trays of mail unattended overnight at an apartment complex. His supervisors say they were gathering evidence.
Probably weren't as, we probably didn't do it as quickly as we should have.
Several of Sherrill's workers were critical of his work as a letter carrier, while others say he was constantly harassed by his supervisors.
In the 6 months since Sherrill's rampage in the Edmond Post Office, those he left behind have been struggling to survive the aftermath of the nightmare.
5 Alive's Jane Braden is live in the newsroom right now to explain how the struggle has changed the post office image from a model office to a troubled one. Jane?
Jerry, union grievances, employee transfers, and just trouble getting back into the door of the post office. The emotional problems are plaguing the workers at the Edmond Post Office today. The healing has begun in their hearts and in their work, but with ripples of controversy. Since August 20th, the workers and management at the Edmond Post Office have wrestled with the difficulty of running a business and at the same time coping with a disaster that still leaves its wounds. The emotions of that day are just below the surface for most. It's hard to go back to work every day in the building where the tragedy occurred. Workers are recovering as victims of a violent crime, and they are still grieving the loss of dear friends. The postal system, in the beginning, reached out, offering free psychological counseling and rearranging the entire interior of the building, trying to chase away the ghosts of last August. But just days after the shooting, employees began feeling a new pressure being added to their problems. Just 2 weeks after the shooting, memo after memo began to appear, taking away small employee liberties, prohibiting all personal phone calls, coffee on the work floor, even the reading of sympathy cards on company time. 6 weeks after the shooting, a meeting with Postmaster Dale Folks heightened that pressure. We have a tape recording of that day. Some employees are surprised and hurt by what they believe is undue pressure. Ron Blackwell is the letter carrier union representative in Edmond.
I think it's been more a case of not what we can do for you right at this moment, but they're more concerned with seeing people get back into a proper frame of mind, a work attitude, and the finer part of human relations has been discarded.
Grievances from employees to their union have increased 200% since last year, when official complaints were very rare from Edmond. Ron Blackwell says rumblings of transfer requests roll throughout the post office. The transfers are difficult, and only 4 have actually tried to find work elsewhere. Tracy Sanchez, whose terrified face emerging from the post office and tearful reunion with her mother are vivid images of that day, says she isn't the only employee who goes to cry alone in the post office restroom. She's upset that hard-fought employee input programs have been stripped away.
And I feel we need these meetings, you know, that we need something, because right now there is no communication between management and employees. There's just a wall there, and these meetings is a chance to communicate, not just communicate because you have to do something.
The postmaster, Dale Folks, refused to talk to 5 Alive News on camera about the problems, but over the phone he says only a handful of employees would consider management's actions as compassionless, adding that he would not, quote, has not been approached by very many employees who do feel that way. Folks says that each employee is handling this disaster differently, and some are more sensitive to it than others. Postmaster says his superiors have been very supportive, recognizing after August 20th, that things were not going to get immediately better.
All right, thank you, Jane.
Edmond's postmaster is leaving his job. Dale Fowkes has been transferred to the Oklahoma City Field Division, which oversees 800 post offices in Oklahoma and Texas. A temporary postmaster has been named until a permanent replacement is found. Fowkes' transfer comes 3 days before congressional hearings into the Edmond post office massacre.
Families of victims of the Edmond postal shootings are headed to Washington, D.C. today.
They plan to attend congressional hearings on the tragedy this week.
5 Alive's Jane Braden joins us live from Will Rogers Airport with the story. Jane?
Kathy, some of the victims of the shooting at the Edmond post office are about to fly out of Will Rogers Airport for Washington in just a few moments. But what they hope will be the beginning of the end of this very long ordeal. They are widows of those killed in the shooting and some postal employees. What they hope to find in Washington are answers to the questions about what happened in that post office. They don't yet believe the public fully knows what did happen that day.
It makes us wonder, and we hope by getting full disclosure, if that's possible, that it will help us to know what happened that day and know what problem areas are that might need to be corrected, and then put this behind us.
The women are also hoping to get increased benefits and also many funding problems that the widows and some of the family members have had from the government in getting paid for what happened and paid for funerals and that sort of thing. They also want to help the employees at the post office for what they believe have been some management problems in the aftermath of the shooting. All of that, they hope, will be in Washington when they get there. Ron and Kathy?
But Jane, who else is going along with the victims' families?
Some people are already in Washington, sort of paving the way for their arrival. There are some postal employees there, some who will testify, some who are going for moral support. There's some shooting victims, and these widows will be there, and tomorrow they'll sort of get their head together and get their plan for testifying on Wednesday.
Okay, Jane. Of course, we'll have updates on that. Meanwhile, the man who was in charge of the Edmond Post Office last August is being transferred. The Edmond Evening Sun says that Dale Folks will be taking a position in the Postal Service Oklahoma City Field Division. Folks transfers the second management change since disgruntled postal worker Pat Sherrill went on that rampage last August. His immediate supervisor was transferred to Florida several weeks after the incident. Bob Hunt of Tulsa takes over today as officer in charge of the Edmond Post Office.
One survivor and 2 family members of victims of the Edmond Massacre are in Washington, D.C. this afternoon to talk to members of Congress about the tragedy and its aftermath. Ron Blackwell, Janet Esser, and Carla Phillips left this morning from Will Rogers World Airport. They say they'll address congressional inquiries on Wednesday into the shooting incident that claimed 15 lives, and they want some answers, too.
I'm so sorry I wasn't there then. While in D.C., we hope to discuss benefits and compensation problems surviving families have experienced or, in some instances, are still experiencing.
Phillips also says that she feels the Postal Service report on the shooting rampage by disgruntled worker Pat Sherrill is not complete and does not give a true picture of the shootings and the events leading up to that incident. One survivor and 2 widows of victims of the Edmond Massacre met with Oklahoma Congressman David Boren today. Ron Blackwell, Janet Esser, and Carla Phillips met with Senator Boren to give him a preview of their concerns about the tragedy before they testify before 2 congressional subcommittees tomorrow.
And joining us now from Washington is one of those people who will testify, Ron Blackwell.
Mr. Blackwell, what do you hope to accomplish in tomorrow's testimony?
We hope to bring to light the faults in current benefit and compensation regulations, enforce compliance to safety regulations, gain access to the postal inspector's findings, and address better coordination between local emergency services and the Postal Service.
It's been said that certain facts have been withheld from the families about this case. Could you tell us what key facts and if you think Congress can get those for you?
Well, we wouldn't know without complete information what facts have been withheld, but we are meeting with our legislators and expressing that concern that we need to know.
Why, in your opinion, sir, do you believe that there have been problems in gaining compensation for the victims?
I think it's a lack of information about the assistance with benefits and a breakdown in communication between management and Labor Department representatives.
Mr. Blackwell, what's been the reception today as you've talked with folks like Senator Boren? Have you been encouraged by the reception you've received? Have they made any promises to you?
No promises, but a lot of support and encouragement. And we were there to thank them for their assistance. They've already been involved early on, and we appreciate that.
What do you believe is really the first step in resolving all of the unrest about this incident?
Psychological counselors have told us that information is essential in the healing process, and we need to know.
So is that what you asked for today in your meetings, for instance, with Senator Boren?
Specifically.
And you do believe that perhaps you're on the road to that information? Do you have some optimism?
We can only hope.
All right, Mr. Blackwell, we thank you very much for taking the time to be with us this evening from Washington.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. The U.S. Postal Service has been blasted from top to bottom at congressional hearings today for its handling of the Edmond Post Office massacre, which left 15 people dead.
5 Alive's Ron Talley of our Washington Bureau was at today's hearings, and he joins us now live with more on that hearing. Ron?
Jack and Jerry, grief-stricken families and survivors of the postal shooting brought their stories to Washington today. Stories of an insensitive postal management that banned reading of sympathy mail on the job, that allowed late payments, benefit payments, and unnecessary confusing paperwork. There was an apology for all of this from the Postmaster General himself, Preston Tisch. But congressmen were so appalled by the shabby treatment of survivors and families that they ordered the post office to go back to each Edmond family victimized by the shooting and take care of their needs, no matter what the cost. No one's sure exactly what triggered the 30-minute shooting spree that killed 14 and injured 6 more in the Edmond post office last August. But now, 8 months later, postal investigators admit they made mistakes. Gunman Patrick Sherrill should not have been given a job or been allowed to keep it. And had the Oklahoma Post Office complied with standard safety procedures, some who died may well have lived.
Nobody got out through door B and C. This is emergency exit.
The people on the north side had no convenient escape route.
But during a special hearing into the tragedy, lawmakers were appalled by the insensitive way postal officials treated survivors of the shooting and families of the victims, with unnecessary paperwork, late payments of benefits, and more.
I had an awful time collecting the body transportation payment. I couldn't get the Postal Service to contact the right funeral home to verify the amount charged for this service.
Also, surviving workers experienced harassment from their boss. No private phone calls, no viewing of sympathy cards, no time off for counseling.
Everyone was in shock from this speech. First, we were attacked by Pat Sherrill. Now we were under an emotional attack from management.
I have to apologize on behalf of the employees of the Postal Service who did not show the great amount of sensitivity they should have shown when a tragedy such as this occurs.
The congressman ordered postal leaders to contact each and every Edmond postal family and iron out each individual problem within 30 days.
And I don't think any member of Congress or any congressional committee is going to turn down any request that you make or any expenditure that you make to try to resolve that problem.
In fairness to Postmaster General Tisch, he took over his job 48 hours before the shooting, twice visited Edmond to set up help for the families, but admits somewhere down the line somebody dropped the ball. Now, as you know, the Edmond postmaster himself, charged with being the least sensitive of all, has been reassigned to another job. It was not, I repeat, not a promotion. Jack and Jerry?
Ron, did this hearing focus much on the hiring practices of the post office?
Jerry, only briefly. The subject did come up, and the postal officials admitted that something went wrong in the system. They're still unable to figure out where and who's responsible or exactly what went wrong. There will be another full hearing on that matter, the hiring matter, at least according to Congressman English's office. A footnote to today's hearing in Washington, there was plenty of praise for the postal workers who survived the massacre, with congressman after congressman astounded at the fact that most were back on their job less than 24 hours after that massacre. Jack and Jerry?
All right, thank you, Ron. Good afternoon. Survivors and family members of victims of the Edmond Massacre continued their efforts today to have the grievances over the handling of the tragedy heard in Washington.
Today they met with U.S. Postmaster General Preston Tisch, and Five Alive's Washington Bureau correspondent Brenda Butner was there, and when the meeting was over, and Brenda joins us now live from Washington. Brenda?
Jack and Jerry, these past few days have not been easy for the families of the victims. As you know, their testimony in Congress yesterday forced them to relive some very painful memories. But today, after meeting with the Postmaster General Tisch for over an hour and a half, and the meeting was at their request, they expressed a real sense of optimism, a sense that finally they may have met somebody who can keep the promises that they've been told for the past 8 months.
I hope that some positive changes come out of it. There were things that they didn't seem to be aware of that now they're aware of, and I think they'll be working on them.
I'm not trying to give them any excuses, but they now are in the right direction, and I think that you'll see some movement real quick.
So this was a problem at the local level primarily?
Seems to be. The investigation will continue, and I think the people responsible have been reassigned.
And even though no real new complaints have been aired today, today's meeting was basically just a rehash of yesterday's testimony. I think that cutting through the red tape and meeting with the man in charge of the Washington bureaucracy gave them a real sense of control. Jack and Jerry?
Brenda, since many of the folks who testified are headed back to Oklahoma, is there a logical next step for them to take now?
Well, there are a few more details to iron out. I know that the union negotiator, Ron Blackwell, hopes to gain full disclosure of the Inspector General's report. But basically, they told us that they are very concerned about putting this whole thing behind them. As one of them said, it's time to stop grieving and to begin to heal.
All right.
Jack and Jerry.
Summer's post office massacre in Edmond, the victims and surviving family members have come away from meetings in Washington, D.C. with a good feeling. Ron Blackwell is one of 12 Oklahomans who attended congressional hearings this past week. Blackwell says Congress was appalled at some of the stories they heard. A full report is promised within 30 days, and Congress has ordered the Postal Service to expedite employee claims for benefits they have coming. There have been allegations that post office officials were unresponsive and insensitive to the needs of families. Blackwell says Congress listened and promised quick results.
It's really reaffirmed our belief, I think, as a whole, that you can bring your plight to the public, and that they will see to it that you don't go unnoticed.